What I will address is a number of questions. They are projected on the screen here. The first one is, why are we so harsh on ourselves? I don't know whether that's also the case in Switzerland, but I presume in Switzerland you also are self-critical, are you? Who's not occasionally self-critical? Anybody who doesn't know what phenomenon I'm talking about? So it seems to be a universal phenomenon. We all are harsh on ourselves at times. Another question is, what is self-compassion? It can actually be an antidote against being harsh on yourselves. I say that already. And is it possible to train it? Why should we do that? Is there a helpful theory to support that? And if there is, how can we actually practice it? Now, I'm sorry to start off with a blunt slide like this in Switzerland, because Switzerland is about the cleanest country in the world, at least where I've ever been. There's nowhere dog shit on the street. If you come in Holland, you walk like this. That's not very good for your emotional intelligence. And here in Switzerland, it's all so clean. And I'm sure you're very emotionally intelligent just because of that already. But even in Switzerland, shit happens. And I don't just mean the shit on the toilet, I mean also the metaphorical shit. We all have stress. Even in Switzerland you have, I think. And we all know people who have burnouts, who get depressed, who are anxious, who are paranoid, who divorce, who get addicted, who drink alcohol too much. And that kind of shit, it happens to us. What's even worse, if you're an animal, it's just a statement, shit happens, you don't think about it. But if you're not an animal, you often think it's my shit. You personalize it. It's my problem. That makes it even worse. And what even makes it a lot more worse, it's my fault. That kind of thought. You can also think it's everybody's fault, but then also it creates actually suffering. You're either suffering yourself more or the other person is suffering more. Now, when we don't live up to our expectations, then usually we get this tendency to be self-critical. We all have a sort of picture how we are at the moment, our actual self. Sort of image in our mind. We also have an image of how we should be, or how we think others think we should be. And the wider that gap, the more self-critical we are. Now this is actually this inner critic, the inner bully we also call it. These brain imaging techniques are really great nowadays because you can actually show it on screen how this phenomenon looks. And it's either saying to your actual self, you're no good, or it's pointing towards your ideal self, you should be better. And it's actually very much tied up with what we call self-conscious emotions. It's because we live in groups, this picture of ourselves is important, and the picture other people have of us is important. So it's tied up with emotions like shame, guilt, envy. And it all goes back to a very basic tendency, is that we want to keep away from danger. That's what we share with all kinds of animals. It's actually a basic mechanism for survival. If there is threat, even if you're in doubt whether it's real threat or not, you better run. Even if you're having a nice meal, you better leave your meal, you run. It's better to miss lunch than to be at lunch. That's a sort of basic rule in life. Now, if the threat comes from inside, it's very difficult to run. if we have an unpleasant emotion or an unpleasant thought, how can we run from that? But still we have this basic tendency. If you can't run, you fight. Our brain seems to be designed for survival rather than for happiness. And it seems to have a negativity bias. And if we see something in ourselves which is not quite right, we tend to fight it, we tend to criticize it. Better criticize yourself than be criticized. Because we're social beings, if we don't criticize ourselves, then probably others will criticize us, which is a lot worse. Because we could be dropped out of the group, which we're very dependent on. Now, this is a very basic definition of compassion, and it has some important elements. Paul Gilbert gives a definition of compassion. It's the capacity to be sensitive to the suffering of ourselves and others. That's important. It goes both ways. It's not either or. And it's not just being passive, it's also the willingness to relieve and prevent it, to do something about it. So it has a more passive side, a sensitivity, and it has a more active side. It's a natural human capacity. It's in all of us, but it's not in all of us as well developed as it could be, perhaps. So that's the aim of compassion training, to develop and deepen it. Something which is already there. Somebody has researched a lot into self-compassion. It's Christine Neff. She's a researcher in America, and she actually distinguished 3 dimensions in self-compassion. One is self-kindness, the other one is common humanity, and the third one is mindfulness, being mindful of the suffering. And she found that people who are high on self-compassion score low on their opposites. They're self-critical, they tend to self-isolation. That means you hide what you don't want the world to see, or you don't even want to look at it yourself. Or you over-identify with how you view yourself or how you view the world. You sort of believe in your own views and you ignore other perspectives. And Chris Kermer, a colleague of hers, actually found that very much these 3 are very basic stress reactions. Fight, flight, freeze, but then towards parts in ourselves. These were designed when the threat comes from outside. And then it works. If the threat comes from inside, it actually causes a lot of problems and a lot of pain. Emotional pain. Self-criticism is tied up with a lot of psychological problems. It's a survival strategy, you could say, for people who criticize themselves a lot. They're more prone to depression, to anxiety, to paranoia. So it's not good for our psychological health. And self-compassion has been shown to correlate with a lot of positive qualities. Psychological well-being, life fulfillment, emotional intelligence. There you go, that's why I'm actually here tonight. And positive emotions. Healthier coping with adverse events, being more resilient to stress, and also a healthier lifestyle. People are more self-compassionate, they eat healthier, they exercise healthier, they communicate healthier. Also, the social health is better. They feel more connected, more empathic, show more altruistic behavior, more capacity to forgive. Now, there is another basic stress reaction they found Next to this fight, flight, freeze, there's also tender befriend. That's a forced stress reaction, which they distinguish in mammals, where it is important if you have only a few offspring and they're vulnerable, you should protect them when they're in danger. And we have this tendency to save our young ones, the vulnerable individuals, when they're in danger. And it's actually a very basic stress reaction, which we are warned against when we're on the plane. We've all seen that, if you've been on a plane, that they really tell you, put on your own oxygen mask first before you put it on to your children. And that's actually because this tender befriend reaction is so basic. We first want to save our kids and the vulnerable ones. But then we actually have less chance to survive. And you see this monkey here, he's saving a puppy from a burning factory. So it's a very basic reaction. They've actually given this picture and a subtitle, "See how compassionate monkeys are." But this is not compassion. This is a very instinctual reaction to save the other species, and it can transcend the species. This dog, or this monkey, is saving a puppy. And I think that has to do with the phenomenon of compassion fatigue. In healthcare, and I think in a lot of professions where you serve others, it's recognized that there's a lot of burnout and a lot of compassion fatigue. And that's actually also because of a misunderstanding of what compassion is. Because if you are tired of compassion, you probably have very little compassion for yourself. And that doesn't go together with this definition. Compassion goes both ways. It's compassion to yourself and to others. And to others and to yourself. So actually it's a misnomer. And actually these people are often over-empathic, but forget themselves. This is to complete the picture. Our tendency to tenderly befriend can actually result in self-sacrifice and over-anxious, over-involved behavior. It's actually stressful. While compassion is not very stressful, it's more easing ourselves and others. It has a soothing quality. Could say, fight, flight, freeze is, how do I survive? Tender befriend is, how do you survive? Compassion is, how do we survive and how do we put each other at ease? And it's actually what the Dalai Lama says, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Is this supported by brain research, by neuroscience? Yes, it is nowadays. I mean, it's not a lot, but what has been done is quite impressive. First, and that's already 10 years ago, the group of Richard Davidson in America started researching monks who had been meditating for years and comparing them to people who have very, very little meditation experience. And they found quite impressive differences in areas of the brain which were active in the meditators who were experienced and those who were not. Both on the EEG and on the fMRI. And it was already clear that the areas associated with empathy and emotion regulation, they were more active in the experienced people. And that showed a stronger response to others in distress. More sophisticated research, and actually with beginners, they only had a very short training. They were compared to those who had not training. They also showed differences. So it's not a matter, don't have to be a monk meditating for 10,000 hours or so. They had even more than that. Just 2-week course, 10-15 minutes a day, was already showing results on the brain level. That in the area associated with positive emotions, there was more activity. And interestingly, and that was the work of a German-Swiss researcher, Tanja Singer, she actually researched people who first did an empathy training and got an empathy exercise. And there actually they found that empathy was more linked to the area which is associated with painful experience. While when they were trained after that in self-compassion, there was more activity in the area linked to positive emotions. It was actually neutralizing the distress they experienced with the empathy. And similar research done by Richie Davidson, he connected that with, after a short self-compassion training, did it actually also alter people's behavior? Yes. An experimental situation, they were inclined to give more, to be more generous to somebody who was in need, to a charitable purpose. So it makes sense to train your brain, to develop training programs. Now only the left-hand side is the ones I know of. Moving on, and not the right 6 well described and also researched already. The one at the bottom is the program I was involved with my colleague Fritz Koster. And they have a lot of overlap. Actually, people in different parts of the world were actually doing the same kind of thing. They sense this need among the clients to be more kind towards themselves and to develop deep training programs because of that. Shall I stop for a while? Sebastian, the difference between the first 5 and our program is actually that ours is a deepening program for people who have already experience with mindfulness. There's a lot of mindfulness training programs offered nowadays. And many of them find it very helpful. But in the mental health field, we also found that 8 weeks was good for a start, but they needed more practice, and especially more practice, to develop a kinder attitude towards themselves. So before I carry on, why not do a little exercise? Is that okay for you? If it's not okay, you can also just sit quietly in your chair. You don't have to do anything. And the ones who would like to join in, they can also sit quietly in their chair and they don't have to do anything. What I would like you to do is to sit as comfortably as you can on a chair like this. You know what? You have been sitting for a while already, haven't you? Perhaps first stand up. And just stretch anything you can, stretch without harming yourself and harming your neighbors. That might be actually a better thing to start. Just stretch everything, as much as you can, but with being kind for your body. And now shake everything without harming yourself and harming your neighbors. Just shake anything. Just energize your body a little bit. And you're not in the light, so you're not making a fool of myself like me, of yourself like me, so just carry on. And then just sit again on this chair and feel how it is to sit. If you need the support of your back, just use it, but if not, it might be helpful to sit up with an unsupported back and see how it is to sit upright without this support. But make sure you have a firm base. Your buttocks are on the chair and your feet are on the floor. Flat feet. And you can rest your hands on your knees or in your lap, whatever finds comfortable. And I usually close my eyes. You can do that as well if you like. If you feel uncomfortable with that, you keep them open. And then you just focus on a spot somewhere in front of you without putting much energy in the looking. And the invitation is actually to just drop into this moment, into this experience, whatever it is, and observe it. What is actually floating by? You could observe your bodily experiences. Do you feel this contact of your feet with the floor? Sitting on the chair? How does the body feel? Is it relaxed or tense? Is it energetic or tired? Are you hot or cool? And maybe also notice a certain mood state, certain emotions. And just to be aware of them. Mindfully note them. You don't have to change anything. It's just a matter of observing that you can observe the weather outside. You can also observe this inner weather state. Whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. What thoughts are passing by? Without going along too much with the content of the thoughts, let's get on with some theory which could be helpful. In theory in the way that we share it with our clients, that is understandable and actually makes sense why we do this practice. One is to have some understanding of how our brain works and how it actually operates. And our brain, the evolutionary way of looking at our brain, it has all kinds of layers, older and newer ones. And this is a very simplified model, but it's a very workable model. The oldest one is the reptilian brain, which is really the brain stem, which deals with all these processes which are for basic survival, and which go together with these 4 F's: fight, flight, feed, and mate. Then slightly newer, or actually 300 million years newer part is called the emotional brain, or the limbic system. An estimation is that the reptilian brain is about 500 million years old, and this one is about 200 million years old, which deals in mammalians with all these emotions. It became important to feel, to connect, to form groups, which wasn't really important in reptilian life. And with groups you need rivalry in rank, who's superior, who's inferior. You need emotions that support the bonding, whom do you feel safe with, whom do you feel not safe with. And there's emotions that support care-seeking and care-giving. Now, when groups got more complex, so with primates and human beings, this whole newer layer developed, which is called the neocortex, or the new brain. Together we call reptilian emotional brain the old brain, and the neocortex the new brain, which deals with a lot of other processes which became very important to survive in complicated groups. Language, imagery, memory, looking backward, looking forward, fantasy, reasoning, storytelling, have a picture of how am I, how is the other. To be able to empathize and those were really important functions when societies got more complex, and we couldn't do without them. The thing is, there are a lot of loops developing between old and new brain. You could say this new brain is really a blessing. We can do so many things thanks to this new brain. We can invent things and make societies a lot more sophisticated and better, but it's also a curse. When we only imagine tomorrow a disaster could happen, then it triggers our old brain. We get anxious and we get stressed. There might not happen anything tomorrow which is bad, but we feel like that anyway. And you could also say, and this is not a neat layer like the other ones are not either, but Daniel Siegel put into his model also the mindful brain, which is more connected with the medial forebrain. The ability to watch these processes, to watch our experience, to watch our emotions, to watch our thoughts, to know that we know. Actually, from Homo sapiens, we've evolved to Homo sapiens sapiens. We know that we know. And roughly, it seems that the new brain is 2 million years old, very young. A mindful brain, perhaps just 10,000 years old. And we need this mindful brain to see all these processes. And it's very helpful if we realize that design is not perfect. And it's not our fault, but we have to find a way to deal with it. So this is usually how we start in this training we have developed. You might say most will run off then, but no. Here we are, all in the same boat, with the brain, body, emotions, the socially developed self. They were not our choice, in a life full of tragedies. Threat, loss, illness, decay, death. You thought you were coming to the theater tonight. And I tell you this, which might not be very nice, but in a way, it's what life is. It ends. It's what nature is like. Now, the positive thing is, what we experience is not our fault. We don't have to blame ourselves for it. And we can develop compassion to deal with it. To acknowledge this inevitable suffering and take responsibility to deal with it is where compassion starts. From the evolutionary perspective, emotions are really messengers that help us on the track of survival. So we keep it a little bit simpler, really. But to clients that makes a lot of sense. We can befriend all our emotions, the pleasant ones and the unpleasant ones, because all of them have to say something to us. It may be that we don't have to listen to them all, but we first better observe them and just be open to the message they might have, because it might be very worthwhile. Don't kill the messenger. Now, this might, in this, for this platform, a bit simple definition of emotional intelligence, the ability to identify and manage your own emotions and the emotions of others. I heard Marcello makes it already much more complex, much more expensive. But for me, this really shows that how do I identify it? By being mindful of them, by really observing them, by really noting what's happening. And managing our emotions, for that compassion is really important. That we do no harm, or not increase harm, but actually alleviate the suffering they may cause. And Perhaps you could say, then we become emotionally wise. 3 basic emotional systems are recognized, and which also are very helpful in working with clients. The threat system is very basic for self-protection. The drive system is also what we need very much to get our food, to get sexual partners. They're both very important for survival of individuals and the species. The other one is also very important to form groups and to feel at ease with each other. Now with the first 2, the focus is very narrow. With the threat system, what is the threat I need to avoid? From where comes a stick that could hit me? With the drive system, it's also very narrow, but then in another direction, which is the carrot, the lures, which I could grab. With the soothing system, it's more wide, it's more open, it broadens, and it's not just towards me, but also towards the other. We use because it may be fairly abstract, but if people think of their pets, their dogs or their cats, it's very obvious usually in what system they are. You just have to look at them. Mostly they are in their soothing system. But this cat will have a very different appearance if an angry dog comes by. And will again have a very different appearance when he's hungry and there's little mice coming by. Now, can you imagine the cat being for 24 hours in the threat or in the drive system? Who can? Cats know that. I mean, they not consciously, they just gravitate towards the soothing system whenever they can. Do we do that? Or do we keep our threat system and drive system going for much longer than is actually healthy? So, a bit more abstract. Who actually recognizes in him or herself what system you have trained in your life the most? Is it the red one? Is it the yellow one? Is it the blue one? And we ask actually people to draw these circles in the relative proportions. And most draw a huge red one in the mental health anyway, or an enormous yellow one, and a very small blue one. But we also found that is true with health professionals and with other people we train. So it's not a matter of one of these is wrong, we all need them. They're all important for survival, but to keep the right balance for our health. The first 2 give stress, the other one gives rest and more peace. Now it's a lot more complicated in human beings, of course, because these old systems, they develop into patterns where also the new brain is involved. We get threat patterns, competition patterns, compassionate and caring patterns. And you can see these patterns in cultures and in families. This is what threat mind looks like. Our attention is focused on danger, the motivation is how can I protect myself? The imagery is often doom and gloom. We judge the risk, is it safe, is it unsafe? We avoid or resist in our behavior and we don't feel very well. We are anxious, aggressive, or have aversion and disgust. Many companies have a lot of threat in them already. Where I work in the healthcare, in hospitals, there's a sort of threat that belongs to the job. But there's also a threat coming from, it's also a company which needs to be financially in balance. And a lot of companies are in bad shape in Holland nowadays. That gives a lot of stress. Managers have stressful meetings. They think of control systems, how to get more out of the company. And Employees get more frustrated. Emotions like frustration and feeling stressed and feeling sick, go on sick leave, becomes more threat of being fired, being told off by a boss. Becomes what emerges is a shame and blame culture, until it actually becomes a fact that people are sacked. Now, this is not a very nice company to work in, you would all agree. You wouldn't choose to go to a workplace like that, but in many companies nowadays it's reality. Certainly in the healthcare in Holland, it can feel like that. I've experienced that myself. And we take that home to our children. It will affect them. And we bully ourselves more often if we are in an atmosphere like that, where we actually need an inner helper. This is actually entirely coincidence that the one is a male and the other a female. It just happened that I found these pictures. This is what a competitive mind looks like. You might recognize that more in your company. That is a very successful company. It goes for fame and your boss want to achieve things and a rival with other companies. This is what it could look like. It goes together with competition, either with other companies, but also often inside. Employees rival with each other, compete each other, and you get the feeling this one is superior to me or inferior to me. You get also a lot of envy and jealousy. And it is also very addictive. If you've scored once, you want to score twice, because it feels so good. So usually we see that our managers want more and more and more. They want to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. Just take on another project and be more successful. Is this a company where you would feel happy? The thing is, a lot of the time, we go backwards and forwards between threat mind and competitive mind. And it goes together with very positive feelings, feeling yes, pride, excitement. It also goes together with frustration and jealousy. And we take that home to our children. They will be affected by this attitude of a competitive mind. And we may be encouraging ourselves more and more to have a bigger ego, have more self-esteem, be more respected by others, but we actually need self-compassion. Now, what could a compassionate mind look like? It's more about we. Not me against another, but an atmosphere of we and being contented. In joy and in sadness, to share with each other. From a sense of common humanity. Basically, we are one. We all want happiness. We all want to avoid suffering. Irrespective of what religion we have, what culture we come from, what color we have, what race. And it's a sort of caring also for the little things. For what's really vulnerable. Even in extreme situations, like this American soldier in the Iraqi war, comforting a child who was separated from a family. But very importantly, it sort of goes through everyday life, this compassionate mind, these emotions which go together with that of contentment and feeling at ease with each other. Is that an atmosphere you know in your company? This feeling of being cared for. How important would that be? And perhaps you would take that home to our children as well. Now, how can we practice it? You just experienced a little exercise. we map it out for people what compassion actually is, it's not just an emotion. It has all these attributes, these qualities. Being sensitive, being sympathetic, being empathetic. It also has the quality of courage, to be able to tolerate the distress, to tolerate discomfort. It has this basic motivation of care for well-being. And being non-judgmental, being wise. There's a whole list of exercises, and I won't go through all of them with you tonight. You'll probably be relieved to hear. Important is that they're all mindfulness-based. You need this basic quality to observe yourself. And with an attitude of being open to outcome. If you are an achiever, you want to do this exercise to really be happy, to really achieve this, then you'll probably be very disappointed. It's more being on the way, opening yourself to experience. It's that you gain insight what's actually harmful and what is helpful to you. There are exercises that work a lot with imagery. Now, many think then, am I fooling myself? Putting images in my head, that's not real. Well, we all know that imagery works. Some of you might feel hungry by now. If we eat, we know our body responds, but just imagine now. Just imagine your favorite dish is behind there. And when the break, when we finish this, you're going to eat this very pleasant meal. What happens to your body? It has the same response, doesn't it? It's just an imagination. Imagination is not real, but the effects are real. And that is what matters. The same thing with sex. I won't go into detail about that. But if you imagine sex, something happens to the body. The whole industry is built on that. If you're a lot in stressful situations, if you're shamed, you're blamed, you have a stress reaction. If you just imagine it, you have a stress reaction. We don't have to practice it. It goes by itself. This we have to practice. It happens in reality. When we're in a safe atmosphere, we feel contented. If we imagine it, we may have to feel the same physical response, the relaxation response. So, going the red road is feeding an inner bully, an inner critic. Going the blue road is feeding an inner helper. And you can support that by images of a safe place, of a compassionate companion, or even embodying your compassion yourself. Just doing as if you're a compassionate person. Just try it out for a day. I'm behaving as if I'm a compassionate person, and just observe what the effect of that is. Actually, they did a research in the Maastricht University in Holland. Just 2 weeks, 10 minutes a day, imagine the best possible self you could be. And it had quite significant results in quality of life, on psychological and physical health issues. Some exercises are more from the traditional field, we know from Buddhist practice, but the word Buddhism doesn't have to be mentioned. It's really a secular training where people practice with these wishes, like you did in the small exercise you just did. And there's another way, more using your imagination, breathing in your pain, breathing out a healing quality. It sounds crazy. We rather want to get rid of our pain and want to hold on what feels nice. But just practicing it the other way around actually has very beneficial effects. It's sort of taking us out of our ego. It sort of helps us to welcome what is difficult and really share, be generous with what is precious. Now, many people experience sort of adverse reaction when they do these exercises. We call that backdraft. It comes from the firework brigade. When you see a building in flames and small compartments are not burning because the oxygen has run out, if a fireman opens a door or a window breaks, there's a rush of oxygen in and you get a fire explosion. Now sometimes you see a phenomenon like that, or actually quite often, with people who actually give warmth, give oxygen to very neglected or traumatized parts. It hurts like hell. Sometimes you see it very subtle. People feel a sort of sadness because they're actually giving warmth to very neglected parts which have been missing that for so long. So they grieve. They feel actually they're touching something which has not been touched for a long time. That's the metaphor of the snowball. If you do that too long with bare hands, your hands freeze. If you bring them to the heating or a hot water tap, it hurts like hell. If you do it slowly, then you can also get the warmth back. Keep your fingers alive. It doesn't hurt so much. So the message is actually that's a very normal phenomenon, but it requires a slower pace. Patterns are very important to recognize. To name them is to tame them, the same in English. But we can't really change them so easily. They are deeply ingrained habits, and we might not like them. We don't get rid of them so easily. Perhaps you see one of your favorites there. Now, do you want to get rid of it? Most usually do. Good luck, but it's very hard to get rid of them. What we can do is have a more pleasant relationship with them. We can practice that actually. By mindfully noting them, naming them, and by practicing self-compassion, which with the suffering that is behind that comes out of it. And then you might not have lost your pattern, but it has lost the sharp edges, and you have a more pleasant relationship with them. Common humanity is what actually is a fundament of the course. And when we do it in groups, it's often what people gives us back, to realize that they're not the only one having problems, and not the only one who are bullying themselves and dealing with it unwisely. To realize that we all have our imperfections, that a part of life, we all have our resistances, our desires, our maladaptive patterns. They're all part of life. We cannot get rid of it, we can compassionately deal with it. Likewise with others, we don't have to approve of all the harmful behavior. It's not like being very permissive. That's not the same as compassion. It's really reaching out to the persons behind it. And there's also a forgiveness practice in this training, which is often very healing for people, especially to start with forgiving themselves. This is actually the message of Oscar Wilde. It's not the perfect, but the imperfect who need love. Now, to finish off with this one, compassion is sort of balanced by other qualities which are in Buddhism called the illimitables. They're not restricted to the ego, they can extend to anyone. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity are four which are actually put into this metaphor of the barometer. Loving kindness is an all-weather friend. It doesn't harm to be kind in all circumstances. Sympathetic joy is a celebrating quality when there's really something positive happening and you're sharing that with others. Compassion is when the weather is not so good. And equanimity needs to hold it all, not to drown, to get absorbed by the extremes. but to give it balance. These are antidotes against their counterparts, which give so much suffering and are so destructive. In many companies also. Hate, cruelty, jealousy, and over-involvement. We use a lot of insights from positive psychology. It's not just dealing with your suffering, it's also taking in the good. A gratitude exercise, a silver lining exercise. Every dark cloud has a silver lining. This bad part of your life, did it actually give you a positive experience? Have you learned something from it you would otherwise not have learned? And what are actually your core values that really direct you in life? These are also a source of happiness. Lastly, it's not just about practicing sitting on a bench or a chair. It's also what do you do with it in real life. It's about practical ethics. It's very difficult to be ethical when you're in your drive or your threat system. And many decisions are made on the basis of threat or drive. But we really need a compassionate mind to be ethical. No mud, no lotus. If you want to take home message, perhaps it's this. We can use our sword in something positive. And the image of the lotus is the deeper it goes into the mud with its roots, into the shit, if you like, the more beautiful the flower. Thank you for your attention and your compassion.
Vielen Dank, Brink. Wir haben kurz Zeit.